Carlos stood with his arms crossed, struggling to maintain his composure. "Marta," he said firmly, "Sophia has told me everything. She says you hurt her when I'm not around, that you yell at her, push her, and even threaten her." Marta let out a nervous laugh, her eyes darting around the room. "What? Carlos, you've got to be kidding me. You know how much I care about Sophia. I'd never hurt her." Carlos's voice lowered, his tone cold and sharp. "I've seen the bruises, Marta, on her arms and legs. How do you explain those?" The color drained from Marta's face, and for a moment she seemed at a loss for words. I don't know. You know how kids are," she stammered. "They're always running around, falling, playing rough. She probably got them at school or the park." Carlos shook his head, his frustration bubbling over. "Some of those bruises are in the shape of fingers, Marta," he said pointedly. "Fingers." Marta took a step back, her posture stiffening as her expression hardened. "And you believe her?" she asked, her tone sharp and defensive. "You believe an 8-year-old over me, after everything we've been through together, Carlos? Do you honestly think I could do something like that?" Carlos ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. "I don't want to believe it, Marta. But the evidence is there, and Sophia has never lied to me. Not once." Marta scoffed, her frustration mounting. "Oh, come on. Kids lie all the time, Carlos. Can't you see what's happening? She's jealous. She doesn't want to share you with me, so she's making up these stories to drive us apart." For a moment, doubt flickered in Carlos's mind. Could Sophia be lying? But then he thought about the fear in her eyes, the bruises on her skin, and the trembling in her voice when she told him the truth. No, he couldn't ignore what he'd seen and heard. "No, Marta," he said, his voice steady. "Sophia isn't making this up. Her story is too consistent, too detailed. And those marks on her body don't lie." "The marks don't prove anything," Marta snapped, her calm facade shattering. "That girl is clumsy. She probably hurt herself to get your attention." Carlos took a step forward, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "Are you saying my daughter is deliberately hurting herself? Do you even hear what you're saying?" Marta hesitated, then stepped back, trying to regain her composure. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean that. It's just, this is insane, Carlos. I love Sophia. I'd never hurt her." Carlos's eyes bore into hers. "Then explain to me why my daughter is terrified of you," he demanded. "Explain why she trembles every time you walk into the room. Explain why she told me you threatened to lock her in a closet if she got out of bed while your friends were over drinking." Marta's face turned pale, and for a moment she was speechless. When she finally spoke, her voice wavered. That's not what happened, Carlos. You have to understand." "Understand what?" Carlos interrupted, his voice rising. "That my daughter has been suffering for months in her own home? That I didn't see it? What's there to understand, Marta?" Marta opened her mouth as if to argue, but then closed it, lowering her gaze. Carlos took a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm. "Look, Marta," he said, his tone measured but firm. "I don't know exactly what's been going on, but I know something is very wrong. For now, I think it's best if you leave." Marta's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "You're kicking me out?" "I'm asking you to give us space," Carlos clarified. "I need time to talk to Sophia, to fully understand what's been happening. And frankly, I don't feel comfortable with you being here while I do that." Marta's voice grew small and vulnerable. "But where am I supposed to go?" Carlos sighed, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. "You can stay with a friend or at a hotel. I'll even pay for the room if necessary. But I need you to leave, Marta. Tonight." Marta looked around as if searching for an escape, a way to reverse the situation. But when she saw the determination in Carlos's eyes, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll pack some things and go. But, Carlos, I swear, this is all a misunderstanding. I would never—" "Not now, Marta." Carlos cut her off. "Just go, please." Marta hesitated for a moment, then nodded and turned toward the bedroom to pack. Carlos watched her go, his emotions a swirling mix of anger, guilt, and sadness. Part of him wanted to believe her, to believe this was all some terrible mistake. But another part, the part that had seen Sophia's bruises and heard her tearful confession, knew the truth. Once Marta was gone, Carlos made his way to Sophia's room. He found her sitting on the bed, clutching her favorite teddy bear tightly. "Daddy," she whispered, "what's going to happen now?" Carlos sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Marta is going to leave for a while, sweetheart," he said gently. "I need you to tell me everything so we can make things better." Sophia nodded slowly, clutching her bear even tighter. "Are you mad at me, Daddy?" Carlos kissed her head softly. "No, my love, I could never be mad at you. I'm so proud of you for being so brave and telling me the truth. I know it must have been very hard." Sophia relaxed a little at his words, leaning against him. "I was so scared you wouldn't believe me." "I will always believe you, Sophia. Always," Carlos assured her, pulling her into a warm hug. Moments later, the sound of the front door opening and closing echoed through the house. Marta was gone. Sophia tensed, but Carlos held her close. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he whispered. "She won't hurt you anymore, I promise." Sophia nodded, though her eyes still held a shadow of fear. Carlos knew the road ahead would be long. There would be emotional wounds to heal and trust to rebuild. But as he held his daughter close, he vowed that they would face it all together, step by step. "How about we order pizza for dinner?" Carlos suggested, trying to lift the mood. Sophia managed a small smile, her first in what felt like ages. "Can I get extra cheese?" Carlos chuckled, his heart lightening at her response. "You can have all the cheese you want." As Sophia began excitedly talking about her pizza preferences, Carlos realized this moment marked a new beginning for them. The challenges ahead would not be easy, but they would face them together. For now, he focused on the present, on his daughter, the pizza, and the knowledge that tonight, Sophia was safe. Carlos stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his thoughts consumed by everything that had happened. Across the table, Sophia looked up from her cereal, her big brown eyes fixed on him. "About Marta?" she asked softly. Carlos nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. About Marta. And everything you told me. I want you to know that I believe you completely." Sophia's voice trembled as she asked, But what, Daddy?" Carlos took a deep breath, preparing himself for what he was about to say. "But I need to see for myself what's going on," he explained. "I need to make sure I can protect you better and figure out exactly how to handle this situation." Sophia's spoon slipped from her hand, splashing milk onto the table. Her eyes widened with panic. "You mean you're going to let Marta come back?" "Only for one day," Carlos quickly clarified, noticing the fear in her expression. "I'm going to pretend to go to work, but I'll actually stay here, hiding at home. I need to see how Marta behaves when she thinks I'm not around." Sophia's face filled with dread. "But Daddy, she'll hurt me if she thinks you're gone." Carlos stood, walked around the table, and wrapped his arms around her in a comforting hug. "I won't let her hurt you," he promised, holding her close. "I'll be here the whole time, watching everything. If she tries to do anything, I'll come out right away and stop her. Do you trust me?" Sophia nodded slowly against his chest. "I trust you, Daddy. But I'm still scared." Carlos kissed the top of her head. "I know, sweetheart, I'm scared too. But we have to do this. It's the only way to make sure Marta can never hurt you again." Over the next few days, Carlos and Sophia carefully prepared their plan. Carlos called Marta, feigning regret, and invited her to return for a day to talk things over. Marta quickly agreed, her voice filled with relief and a sweetness that Carlos now recognized as false. The night before, what Carlos had started calling the big day, he and Sofia sat together on the couch, going over the plan one last time. "Remember, Sofia," Carlos said, his voice serious but gentle. "Tomorrow morning we'll act like it's a normal day. I'll pretend to leave for work, but I'll actually be hiding in your closet." Sofia clutched her teddy bear tightly. "And I'll pretend everything is normal, even though I'm scared." "Exactly," Carlos said, stroking her hair. "I know it's hard, but you have to act like nothing is wrong. If Marta suspects anything, the whole plan will fall apart." Sofia nodded, her small face determined. "I'll try, Daddy. But what if she tries to hurt me before you can come out of the closet?" Carlos felt his chest tighten, but he kept his tone calm for her sake. "I'll be paying close attention. If there's even the slightest sign of danger, I'll come out right away. And don't forget, we'll have the intercom. If you feel unsafe, just say the code word, and I'll come out immediately." "Strawberry ice cream," Sofia recited, remembering the phrase they had chosen together. Carlos smiled, proud of her courage. "That's right, strawberry ice cream. And no matter what happens, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You're the bravest little girl I've ever known." Sofia snuggled into his arms, seeking comfort in his embrace. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, my brave little one," Carlos whispered, kissing her head. The next morning, Carlos woke before dawn, his stomach churning with nerves. He dressed quietly, mentally preparing himself for what lay ahead. When he went to check on Sofia, he found her already awake, sitting on her bed with wide, alert eyes. "Ready for today, sweetheart?" Carlos asked gently. Sofia nodded, clutching her teddy bear tightly. "I'm ready, Daddy." Carlos asked softly, "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Sofia nodded, though her wide eyes and trembling hands betrayed her fear. "I'm ready, Daddy," she whispered. They ate breakfast in tense silence, neither able to summon the energy for small talk. The weight of what was to come hung heavy in the air. Just as Carlos was finishing the dishes, the doorbell rang. He dried his hands and turned to Sofia. "That must be Marta," he said. He knelt down to look into her eyes. "Remember, act normal. I'll leave in a few minutes, but I'll be here the whole time. Okay?" Sofia nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Carlos stood and walked to the door. Marta stood there, a nervous smile on her face. "Hi, Carlos," she said softly. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Carlos forced a smile. "Come in, please. I was just about to leave for work." Marta stepped inside, her eyes scanning the apartment as though she were seeing it for the first time. When her gaze landed on Sofia, who sat stiffly at the kitchen table, her smile widened. "Sofia, sweetheart, I've missed you so much." Sofia muttered a quiet greeting, her eyes fixed on her cereal bowl. Carlos noticed how her small shoulders tensed, but Marta seemed oblivious. "Well, I have to go," Carlos announced, picking up his briefcase. "I'll be back this evening and we can talk then, okay?" "Of course," Marta replied eagerly, her tone syrupy. "Have a good day at work." Carlos bent down to kiss Sofia on the forehead. In a whisper, he said, "Remember, I'll be here the whole time." She nodded slightly, still not meeting his gaze. With one last glance at his daughter, Carlos stepped out the front door, closing it behind him. He waited in the hallway for a few moments, listening intently. Through the door, he could hear Marta's cheerful voice talking to Sofia, though he couldn't make out the words. Quietly, Carlos used a spare key hidden under the doormat to re-enter the apartment. He moved cautiously, taking care not to make a sound as he slipped into Sofia's room. He hid in the closet, leaving the door slightly ajar to watch and listen. Minutes turned into hours as Carlos stayed hidden. He could hear Marta and Sofia moving around the apartment, their voices a distant murmur. Occasionally, he heard Sofia laugh, but it was a strained, forced sound that made Carlos's stomach churn. He doubted Marta noticed the difference. After lunch, the tone shifted. Carlos heard footsteps approaching Sophia's room and tensed, preparing himself for what might happen next. The door creaked open, and Sophia entered, followed closely by Marta. Sophia sat on her bed, clutching her teddy bear, while Marta stood near the door, her posture blocking the exit. "Well, Sophia," Marta said, her voice suddenly cold and devoid of the sugary tone she had used earlier. "I think you and I need to have a little talk." Carlos felt a chill run through him. Marta's tone had transformed, revealing a darker, more threatening side. He leaned forward slightly, straining to see and hear more. "About what, Marta?" Sophia asked timidly, her voice trembling as she pressed her back against the wall. "About the lies you've been telling your father," Marta snapped, stepping closer. Her posture was menacing, her expression hard. "I know what you've been saying about me. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I didn't notice why he kicked me out?" Sophia shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "No, I didn't lie. I only told him the truth. You were hurting me." Marta let out a cruel laugh. "Hurting you? You stupid little girl. I haven't even started hurting you." Carlos's fists clenched as he fought the urge to burst out of the closet. He needed to let this play out, to gather undeniable proof. But every fiber of his being screamed to protect his daughter. Marta stepped closer, leaning over Sophia with a sneer. "Listen to me, you little liar," she hissed. "You're going to tell your father that it was all a misunderstanding, that you made it up because you were jealous. Do you understand?" Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she shook her head. "I can't do that," she said, her voice breaking. "It would be a lie." Marta's hand shot out, grabbing Sophia's arm tightly. Sophia cried out in pain. "You're hurting me," she sobbed. "This is nothing compared to what I'll do if you don't do as I say," Marta hissed, her grip tightening. Carlos's heart pounded as he prepared to act. He couldn't wait any longer. It was time to put an end to this nightmare. "What I say," Marta growled, tightening her grip on Sophia's arm. Her voice dripped with menace, and Carlos felt his rage boil over. He couldn't let this go on for another second. Just as he was about to burst out of the closet, Sophia shouted, her voice trembling. "Strawberry ice cream, strawberry ice cream." That was all Carlos needed. He flung open the closet door and stormed into the room. The suddenness of his appearance startled Marta so much that she let go of Sophia's arm and stumbled back. What are you doing here?" Marta stammered, her face pale with shock. Carlos positioned himself between Marta and Sophia, his body trembling with barely contained fury. "I've seen and heard everything, Marta," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Every word, every threat, every time you laid your hands on my daughter." Marta's confident facade crumbled in an instant. She seemed to deflate, her bravado evaporating. "Carlos, It's not what it looks like," she stammered, desperation creeping into her voice. "I was just trying to—" "Trying to what?" Carlos interrupted, his voice sharp and cutting. "Threaten a child? Hurt her? Force her to lie? Is that what you were trying to do?" "No!" Marta exclaimed, her voice faltering. "I was just trying to discipline her. Sophia has been acting so rebellious lately, and Enough!" Carlos roared, his voice so loud that both Marta and Sophia flinched. "I don't want to hear another lie, Marta. I've seen your true face, and it's vile." Marta's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly shifted tactics, her tone softening. "Carlos, please," she pleaded, "I love you. We can work through this. I know I've made mistakes, but I can change. Please, don't do this." Carlos shook his head, his voice cold and resolute. "There's nothing to work through, Marta. I want you out of this house, now. And if you ever come near my daughter again, I'll make sure you're arrested." Marta looked from Carlos to Sophia, who sat frozen on the bed, clutching her teddy bear tightly. For a moment, it seemed like Marta was going to say something else, but then she simply turned and walked out of the room. Seconds later, The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the apartment. Carlos immediately turned to Sofia and wrapped her in a protective hug. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Did she hurt you?" Sofia sobbed into her father's chest. "I'm okay, Daddy. I was so scared, but I knew you were here." Carlos held her tighter, tears streaming down his own face. "I'm so sorry, my love," he whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was happening. I'm sorry I put you in this situation." Sofia pulled back slightly, her tearful eyes full of love and reassurance. "It's not your fault, Daddy. You were so brave to stand up to Marta." Carlos managed to smile through his tears, brushing her hair back. "No, sweetheart. You're the brave one. You've been so strong through all of this, and I'm so proud of you." They stayed like that for a long while, holding each other as they processed the events that had just unfolded. Finally, Carlos broke the silence, his voice soft but lighter. "What do you say we order pizza for dinner? I think we've earned it." Sofia nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Can we get pepperoni with extra cheese?" Carlos chuckled, kissing her forehead. "You can get whatever you want, my love. Let's go to the living room and order it." As they walked out, Carlos noticed how Sofia glanced nervously around, her eyes darting to every corner of the apartment, as if expecting Marta to reappear at any moment. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he said softly. "Marta's gone, and she won't come back. We're safe now." Sofia nodded, but Carlos could see the lingering fear in her eyes. They sat together on the couch, and Carlos pulled out his phone to order the pizza. While waiting for the call to connect, he noticed Sofia fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "What's wrong, Sophie?" he asked, lowering the phone for a moment. Sofia looked up at him, her voice small and filled with worry. "Daddy, what if Marta comes back?" Carlos placed the phone down and cupped her face gently in his hands. "Sofia, listen to me. She won't come back. I'll make sure of it. You're safe, sweetheart. I promise." Sofia's lips trembled, but she nodded slowly. "Okay, Daddy." Carlos hugged her again, silently vowing to do everything in his power to ensure her safety and rebuild her sense of security. For now, they had a quiet evening ahead, free from fear. They would take it one step at a time, together. Carlos felt his heart tighten as he saw the fear in Sofia's eyes. She looked at him and whispered, "What if she tries to come back while we're asleep?" Carlos couldn't bear her anxiety. Without finishing the pizza order, he set his phone down and pulled Sofia into a hug. "Listen to me, sweetheart," he said firmly but gently. "Marta won't come back. I'll make sure of it." Sofia looked up at him, her eyes filled with cautious hope. "Really? Really," Carlos reassured her. "In fact, tomorrow we'll change the locks." Her face brightened slightly. "Can we really do that?" "Of course," Carlos said with a nod. "I'll call a locksmith first thing in the morning. And you know what else we'll do?" Sofia shook her head, curious. "What?" "We'll install a security system," Carlos continued. "Cameras, alarms, everything. That way we can see who's at the door before opening it. And if anyone tries to break in, the police will be called automatically." Sofia's eyes widened with amazement, like in spy movies. Carlos laughed, relieved to see a spark of excitement return to her face. "Exactly like in spy movies. We'll be the best secret agents in the building." Sofia giggled, her first laugh in days. "And we'll have code names, right?" "Of course," Carlos said with mock seriousness. "You'll be Agent Teddy Bear." Sofia scrunched up her nose. "Daddy, that's not cool at all." Carlos pretended to consider. "You're right, how about Agent Brave?" Sofia thought for a moment before nodding. "I like it. What will your code name be?" Carlos stroked his chin, pretending to think deeply. Agent 3-Day Beard?" Sofia burst into laughter. "That's a terrible name, Daddy." "Oh, really?" Carlos said with mock offense, and then he launched a playful tickle attack. You think my code name is terrible? Sophia squirmed and laughed uncontrollably, trying to escape. Yes, it's the worst name ever. Carlos laughed too, his heart filling with joy at the sound of her laughter. For a moment, all the fear and tension of the past week seemed to melt away. Finally, they both collapsed in a breathless heap, tears of laughter in their eyes. Carlos hugged Sophia tightly, kissing the top of her head. I love you so much, my brave little agent, he murmured. I love you too, Daddy, Sophia replied, snuggling into his chest. They stayed like that for a while, enjoying the rare moment of peace. Then Sophia's stomach growled loudly, breaking the quiet. Carlos chuckled. I think someone's hungry. Do you still want that pizza? Yes, please, Sophia said enthusiastically, her earlier fear momentarily forgotten. While Carlos called the pizzeria again, Sophia disappeared into her room and returned with a notebook and colored pencils. What are you going to draw? Carlos asked after hanging up the phone. Our new security system, Sophia said seriously. We need to figure out where to put the cameras and the lasers. Carlos raised an eyebrow. Lasers? Of course, Sophia said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. All good security systems have lasers. Carlos smiled, deciding to play along. Naturally, but remember, the lasers have to be invisible so the bad guys can't see them. Sophia frowned, thinking hard. Then we'll have to use invisible ink to draw them. Brilliant idea, Agent Brave, Carlos said, his tone as serious as hers. We'll pick some up at the spy store tomorrow. Sophia giggled, knowing her father was joking but loving the game. She began sketching her elaborate security system, explaining each element as she went. Carlos watched her, marveling at her resilience. Just a few hours earlier, she had been terrified, and now she was laughing and planning. He knew the road to healing would be long, but moments like this gave him hope. The doorbell rang suddenly, startling them both. Sophia froze, her eyes wide with fear. It's okay, sweetheart, Carlos said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's probably just the pizza. Do you want to come with me to the door so you can see that everything's fine? Sophia nodded, gripping his hand tightly as they walked to the door. Carlos looked through the peephole and smiled. See for yourself, he said, lifting Sophia so she could see. It's just the pizza delivery guy. Sophia peeked through the peephole and sighed in relief. Carlos opened the door, paid for the pizza, and closed it securely behind him, making sure to lock it. See? Everything's fine, he said, carrying the pizza to the kitchen. Now, how about we eat this delicious pizza while we keep planning our security system? Sophia nodded, her enthusiasm returning. Yes, and we can watch a spy movie afterward to get more ideas. That sounds like a perfect plan, Carlos said, smiling. As they ate and talked, Carlos felt a mix of relief and worry. He was relieved that Marta was no longer in their lives and that Sophia was safe, but he couldn't ignore the challenges ahead. The fear wouldn't disappear overnight and there would be hard moments. But as he watched Sophia's face light up as she explained her latest idea for catching bad guys, Carlos felt a deep sense of reassurance. Daddy, Sophia said, suddenly interrupting his thoughts, thank you for believing me and for protecting me. Carlos felt a lump in his throat. Always, my love, he said. I'll always believe you, and I'll always protect you. We're a team, remember? Sophia smiled and held out her fist. The best team. Carlos bumped her fist with his. The best team in the world. As they finished their dinner and settled in to watch a movie, Carlos silently vowed to do everything in his power to help Sophia heal. It wouldn't be easy, but they would face it together. As night fell and the city outside grew quiet, a father and his daughter cuddled on the couch, laughing at the antics of spies on the screen. For the first time in weeks, they felt safe. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Carlos smiled at Sophia the next morning, his tone gentle but firm. "Remember what we talked about last night? Today we're changing the locks and installing the security system." Sophia's eyes lit up with a mix of hope and lingering fear. "Really?" "Really," Carlos assured her with a nod. "We're going to be the best secret agents in the whole neighborhood. No one will be able to get in without our permission." A small smile crept onto Sophia's face. "Can we set up traps too?" Carlos chuckled softly. "Maybe not real traps, but we can come up with some fun ideas for our security system. How about we have breakfast first and then make a list of everything we'll need?" Sophia nodded eagerly and jumped off his lap to grab some paper and pencils. Carlos watched her, amazed yet again at her resilience. Despite everything she'd been through, she still managed to find moments of joy and excitement. It gave him a glimmer of hope. As Carlos prepared breakfast, his mind wandered back to Marta. Where was she now? Would she try to come back? The thought made his stomach churn. He clenched his jaw. No, he couldn't let that happen. He would do everything in his power to keep Sophia safe. "Daddy, look!" Sophia's excited voice pulled him from his thoughts. She held up a large sheet of paper covered in colorful drawings. "I made a plan for how our security system should look." Carlos walked over and sat beside her at the table. The drawing depicted their apartment surrounded by laser beams, giant cameras, and what appeared to be a moat filled with crocodiles. "Well, well," he said, pretending to be serious as he examined the masterpiece. "This is very impressive, Agent Brave. But I think the crocodile moat might be a little tricky to maintain in an apartment." Sophia giggled. "They wouldn't be real crocodiles, Daddy. Just to scare the bad guys." "Ah, holographic crocodiles," Carlos said with a mock-stern nod. "Very clever." They spent breakfast discussing their secret fortress, as Sophia had named it. Despite the light-hearted conversation, Carlos couldn't help but notice how Sophia tensed up every time there was a noise outside. He made a mental note to ease her fears as much as he could. After breakfast, Carlos made a few phone calls. First to a locksmith, who promised to come in the afternoon, and then to a security company to arrange for a consultation. When he hung up, he turned to Sophia. "All set. The locksmith will be here at 3 and the security expert will come at 5. How about we go out now and pick up a few extras to make our fortress even better?" Sophia's face brightened. "Can we get flashlights and walkie-talkies like real spies?" Carlos grinned. "I think we can make that happen. Come on, Agent Brave, we have a mission to complete." They left the apartment, and Carlos noticed how tightly Sophia clung to his hand. At the electronics store, they picked out walkie-talkies, LED flashlights, and even a small motion detector, which Carlos hoped would help ease Sophia's anxiety. They were waiting in line to pay when Carlos felt Sophia suddenly tense up. Following her gaze, he saw what had caught her attention and felt a chill run down his spine. Marta had just walked into the store. "Daddy," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with panic. "Stay calm, sweetheart," Carlos murmured, moving to shield her with his body. "I'm right here." But it was too late. Marta had already seen them. For a moment, she looked just as surprised as they were, but her expression quickly changed. Carlos saw a flicker of guilt cross her face, followed by a determined look as she started walking toward them. "Carlos," she said, her voice soft but firm. "What a surprise to see you here." Carlos felt anger rising inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was a public place. "Marta," he said coldly, "I don't think we have anything to discuss." "Please, Carlos," Marta said, glancing around and lowering her voice as she noticed a few people watching. "I just want to explain. Things aren't what you think." Carlos felt Sophia trembling behind him, and he couldn't bear to see her so scared. "This isn't the time or place, Marta," he said firmly. "I've asked you to stay away from us." "I know, but—" Marta took a step closer, reaching out a hand toward Sophia. "Sophia, sweetheart, you know I love you. This has all been a misunderstanding." Carlos couldn't take it anymore. He pulled out his phone, his voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. "One more step, Marta," he warned, "and I'll call the police. I recorded everything that happened yesterday. If you come near Sophia again, I'll show them." Marta paled visibly. "Recording? What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Carlos replied, his tone sharp. "Every word, every threat, every time you hurt my daughter, it's all recorded." For a moment, Marta's face twisted in shock, then fear, and finally something darker. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "Try me," Carlos said, his voice steady now. "Stay away from us, Marta. This is your final warning." Marta stood frozen for a moment before turning and walking out of the store. Carlos stayed tense until she was completely out of sight, then turned to Sophia and knelt down to look her in the eyes. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Sophia nodded, though tears glistened in her eyes. "I'm scared, Daddy." Carlos hugged her tightly. "I know, my love. But she won't hurt you again. I promise." As they left the store with their new spy gadgets, Carlos silently vowed to keep that promise no matter what. Marta's words were sharp and deliberate. "Everyone knows what kind of father you are, leaving your daughter alone with someone who supposedly hurt her. What will people think of you?" The accusation hit Carlos like a punch to the gut. For a moment he faltered, guilt and doubt creeping in. How would he explain his actions to others, leaving Sophia in a vulnerable position just to gather evidence? But before he could respond, Sophia stepped out from behind him. She was trembling, her small frame filled with both fear and determination. Her voice, though quiet, was steady as she addressed Marta. "No," she said firmly. "You're not going to make my dad feel bad. He believed me. He protected me. You're the bad one, not him." Marta looked stunned, clearly unprepared for Sophia's boldness. Carlos felt a surge of pride in his daughter's bravery. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "You hurt her," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I suggest you leave now before I call security." Marta glanced around and seemed to notice for the first time the curious and concerned stares of customers and store employees. Her defiance faltered. Finally, she muttered, "This isn't over," before turning and walking out of the store. Carlos knelt down to Sophia's level, his hands gently holding her shoulders. "Are you okay, sweetheart? You were so brave," he said softly. Sophia nodded, though her small body still trembled slightly. "I was scared, Daddy," she admitted, her voice quivering. "But I didn't want her to make you feel bad. You believed me. You're the best dad in the world." Carlos felt his throat tighten as a wave of emotion swept over him. He pulled Sophia into a hug, holding her close. "And you," he murmured into her hair, "are the bravest, most amazing little girl in the world. I'm so proud of you." When they finally pulled apart, they noticed the store manager approaching, his face filled with concern. "Is everything okay here?" he asked. "Do you need me to call the police?" Carlos shook his head. "Thank you, but I think she's gone. We really appreciate your concern." The manager nodded, though he still looked uneasy. "If you need anything at all, just let me know." "Thank you," Carlos said sincerely. He quickly paid for their items, keeping Sophia close, and they left the store. As they walked home, Carlos kept scanning the area, alert for any sign of Marta. Sophia clung tightly to his hand, her earlier bravery giving way to quiet fear. "Daddy," she said hesitantly, "do you think Marta will try to bother us again?" Carlos sighed. He didn't want to lie to her, but he also didn't want to scare her further. "I don't know, sweetheart," he admitted, "but I promise you, I'll do everything I can to keep us safe. And remember, we have our super secret spy team now." A small smile crept onto Sophia's face. "Right. And soon, We'll have the new locks and the security system." "Exactly," Carlos said with a nod. "No one will be able to get into our secret fortress without our permission." When they arrived home, Carlos immediately locked the door behind them. Sophia ran to her room to put away their new spy gear, while Carlos sank onto the couch, feeling emotionally and physically drained. The encounter with Marta replayed in his mind, her veiled threat to expose his decision to use Sophia as bait haunting him. Had he made the right choice? Had he put his daughter in unnecessary danger? "Daddy?" Sophia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, holding one of the walkie-talkies. "Can we try these out?" Carlos forced a smile and got up. "Of course, Agent Brave. Let's see what these gadgets can do." For the next hour, they played with the walkie-talkies, creating secret missions and using made-up codes. Hearing Sophia laugh and watching her enjoy herself eased some of Carlos's worries, at least for the moment. Just as they were starting to relax, the doorbell rang. It was exactly 3 p.m., and Carlos felt a flicker of relief. "That must be the locksmith," he said, standing. Sophia tensed slightly, but Carlos reassured her. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's just the person who's going to help make our fortress even stronger." Sophia nodded, gripping her walkie-talkie tightly as she followed her dad to the door. For the first time in a long while, Carlos felt a sense of hope that things were finally moving toward a safer and brighter future for them both. At 3:00 p.m. sharp, Carlos approached the door, checking the peephole. It was the locksmith, a middle-aged man with a kind face and a toolbox in hand. Carlos opened the door cautiously, keeping Sophia behind him just in case. "Good afternoon," the man greeted. "I'm Martin from Secure Locksmith Services. Are you Mr. Carlos?" Carlos nodded, relaxing slightly. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for coming so quickly." Martin stepped inside and immediately began examining the existing lock. "Any specific preferences for the new lock?" "The most secure one you've got," Carlos answered without hesitation. "And if possible, I'd like one that can be opened with both a code and a key." Martin nodded, clearly understanding the urgency of the situation. "I've got just the thing, a high-security model with a digital keypad and a backup key. Practically impossible to force open." As Martin got to work, Sophia watched with fascination. She tugged on Carlos's sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, can I pick the code?" Carlos smiled, crouching to her level. "Of course, sweetheart, but it has to be something we'll always remember." Sophia frowned in thought before her face lit up. "What about my birthday?" "Perfect idea," Carlos said with a nod. Turning to Martin, he asked, "Can we set the code to 1507? "Absolutely," Martin replied as he finished installing the new lock. "Let me show you how it works." For the next few minutes, Martin demonstrated how to use the lock. Sophia's eyes sparkled with excitement at the idea of having a secret code to enter their home. She practiced entering the numbers a few times, her confidence growing with each attempt. Just as Martin began packing up his tools, the doorbell rang. Carlos tensed immediately, instinctively pulling Sophia close to him. "Are you expecting anyone else?" Martin asked, noticing Carlos's reaction. "The security company wasn't supposed to come until 5, Carlos replied, checking his watch. "But it's only 4:30. Cautiously, Carlos approached the door and looked through the peephole. His heart sank. It was Marta. He turned to Sophia and said in a low, firm voice, "Sweetheart, go to your room and lock the door, okay?" Sophia's eyes widened, sensing the tension in her father's voice. She nodded quickly and ran to her room. Once he heard the soft click of her door locking, Carlos turned to Martin. "I'm sorry, but would you mind staying a little longer? Things just got, complicated." Martin, sensing the gravity of the situation, nodded. "Of course. Do you need me to call the police?" Carlos hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. "Not yet, but thank you. Just stay close, please." Taking a deep breath, Carlos opened the door, keeping the chain in place. "Marta," he said coldly, I told you not to come back." Marta's face was a mix of agitation and desperation. Her eyes were red, as though she'd been crying. "Carlos, please," she pleaded. "We need to talk. Things aren't what you think." "There's nothing to talk about," Carlos replied firmly. "I asked you to stay away." "You don't understand." Marta's voice rose slightly. "I love Sofia. I never wanted to hurt her. I was just under so much stress, and I made mistakes. But I can change. We can fix this." Carlos felt anger bubbling inside him, but he kept his voice steady. "Fix this? Do you think there's a way to fix the fact that you terrorized my daughter? That you hurt her physically and emotionally?" "It was a misunderstanding," Marta insisted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sofia exaggerated things. You know how kids are? They make up stories sometimes." "Enough," Carlos interrupted, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "I saw the bruises, Marta. I heard you threaten her. There is no misunderstanding." Marta's defiance seemed to crumble at his words. Her tone softened as she tried a different approach. "Carlos, please, I love you. I love Sofia. We're a family. You can't just throw me out of your life like this." "We're not a family," Carlos said, his tone firm and resolute. "A family protects each other. They don't hurt each other. They don't threaten each other. What you did is unforgivable." "No!" Marta's voice broke into a scream, her desperation spilling out. "You can't do this to me! You can't take Sofia away from me!" Before Carlos could respond, he heard a soft noise behind him. Turning, he saw Sofia standing in the hallway, her wide eyes filled with fear. Carlos moved toward her, shielding her from Marta's view. "Go back to your room, sweetheart," he said gently. Marta's eyes softened as she saw Sofia. "Sofia, please," she pleaded. "You know I love you. Tell your dad it was all a misunderstanding." Carlos turned back to Marta, his voice sharp. "That's enough, Marta. Leave now, or I will call the police." Marta's face twisted with frustration and despair, but she seemed to realize she had no choice. She took a step back and glared at Carlos. "This isn't over," she said before turning and walking away. Carlos waited until she was completely gone before locking the door and double-checking the new lock. Then he knelt in front of Sofia, taking her hands in his. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Sofia nodded but clung to him tightly. "I'm scared, Daddy," she whispered. Carlos hugged her close, kissing the top of her head. "I know, sweetheart, but you're safe now. She won't hurt you again. I promise." Carlos knelt down, gently placing his hands on Sofia's shoulders. "Sofia," he said softly, "I asked you to stay in your room." "I know, Daddy," Sofia replied in a small voice. "But I heard yelling and I was scared Marta might hurt you." Carlos's heart ached at her words. His daughter, scared for his safety, had found the courage to come out and face her fears. Before he could say more, Marta's demeanor shifted as soon as she noticed Sofia. "Sofia, sweetheart," Marta cooed, her tone saccharine. "Do you miss me? I know things have been hard, but we can fix this. Don't you want us to be a family again?" Sofia glanced between Marta and Carlos, her expression torn. Carlos could see the conflict in her eyes, the natural desire to believe Marta's sweet words, battling against the fear and pain she had endured over the past few months. Her voice trembled as she began, Then, gathering her courage, she straightened up. "No," she said firmly, "I don't want you to come back. You hurt me. You scared me. Daddy believes me and protects me. You're not my family." Marta's face went pale at Sofia's words, seemingly at a loss. Carlos, swelling with pride at his daughter's bravery, stood and looked Marta in the eye. "You heard her," he said firmly. "Now, I'm asking you one last time. Leave and don't come back. If you try to contact us again, I'll call the police and show them the recording." Marta's eyes widened, her voice now tinged with desperation. "What recording?" Carlos pulled out his phone. The one I made yesterday while I was hiding in the closet. Every word, every threat, every time you hurt Sophia, it's all here. Marta's expression turned to horror. No, you can't have that. I do, Carlos replied, his tone steady. And if you don't leave right now, the police will have it too. Marta glanced between Carlos, Sophia, and Martin, the locksmith who had remained silently observing the scene. Realizing she had lost, Marta muttered, "This isn't over," though her voice lacked any real conviction. "Yes, it is," Carlos said as he firmly closed the door, locking it behind her. Sophia ran to him and Carlos knelt to catch her in his arms. She clung to him tightly, her small frame trembling. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she sobbed. "I know you told me to stay in my room, but—" "Shh, it's okay, my love," Carlos soothed, stroking her hair. "You were so brave. I'm so proud of you." Martin cleared his throat, speaking gently. "Sir, would you like me to call the police now?" Carlos hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. "No, I don't think it'll be necessary, but thank you for staying. I really appreciate your help." Martin nodded, understanding. "No problem. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to call us." After Martin left, Carlos carried Sophia to the couch, sitting with her still nestled in his arms. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Sophia nodded against his chest. "Yes, Daddy. I was scared, but I'm glad Marta is gone." "Me too, my love," Carlos said, kissing the top of her head. "Me too." They stayed like that for a while, the quiet broken only by Sophia's occasional sobs. Carlos knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The trauma of the past wouldn't disappear overnight, and they would likely need professional help to heal. But for now, with Sophia safe in his arms, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Together, they had faced something terrible and come out stronger. They were a team, father and daughter, ready to take on the world. The doorbell rang again, startling them both. Carlos checked the time, 5 p.m. sharp. He smiled faintly. "That must be the security company," he said with relief. "Do you want to help me plan our new security system, Agent Brave?" Sophia looked up, a small smile breaking through her tear-streaked face. "Can we get cameras and sensors, like in spy movies?" Carlos chuckled softly. "We'll see what the expert recommends, but I promise we'll make this the safest fortress in the whole city." Hand in hand, they walked to the door to greet the technician. As Carlos opened it, he realized that while the road to recovery might be long and challenging, they had something more valuable than any security system: their unwavering bond. Together, they could face whatever challenges the future held.